been a while since I've spoken, and I think the last time I spoke was Elmer's dedication. And I took a break from the series I've been doing on evangelism to actually do some evangelism. But with God's help this morning, I'm hoping to conclude that series on evangelism. So I'm hoping this will be final sermon on evangelism, and then we'll move on to something fresh and new. And when it comes to sharing the gospel, many of us are hesitant, even reluctant. And as I've said before, everything I say this morning, I'm saying to myself. We're uncertain about what to say. We're not sure how to go about introducing Jesus into a conversation. You may have seen a Christian do that, and it's come across as very unnatural, quite jarring, quite abrasive even. Which I suppose is better than not saying anything at all. But it's an area that most of us struggle in. If we do manage to introduce Jesus into a conversation, we then struggle to talk about him in a clear, authentic, and compelling way. When it comes to evangelism, we're often uncertain about what to say. However, when it comes to the performance of our favorite football team, we can talk or favorite sports team, we can talk very easily and articulately about that. We can talk fervently, even impulsively, about our personal interests and hobbies. We can talk enthusiastically and at great length about certain topics. Our favorite TV show, a fascinating documentary that we watched on Netflix, probably about some serial killer or something like that. I don't watch those. Our political views, or our opinions about the state of the world. We can talk very, very animatedly about any of those things. Why is it that we can talk about so many subjects effortlessly and fluently, yet when it comes to Jesus, we often dry up? It's because of fear. It's because of fear. The fear of man. Fear of man. We fear being ridiculed, being made to feel small, being made to feel stupid. We fear being dismissed or minimized. We fear being disliked. We fear being rejected, cancelled even, publicly shunned and ostracized. We fear losing out. We fear missing out, perhaps on opportunities. When we engage in conversation with people, we tend to choose our words very carefully. We express views that are likely to be welcomed by other people in the room. And we tend to avoid topics that might spark disagreement, or worse, criticism. Now, following the riots, which took place on British streets in August, more than 30 people were arrested. Most of them didn't participate in the riots. They were arrested because of the content of their social media posts. Keir Starmer openly criticised social media companies like X, formerly Twitter, for allowing the spread of misinformation and for tolerating hate speech. However, Elon Musk is not the sort of person that is easily pushed around. He's the owner of X. He responded by denouncing the British government, accusing it of having double standards. That's where the expression two-tier care came from. It came from Elon Musk. Accusing them of being a threat to free speech. Now, one of Musk's posts went as far as likening Britain to the Soviet Union. Now, for years, the Christian Institute, Keith sometimes talks about the Christian Institute on a Monday at the prayer meeting. They deal with very pressing issues that are important for us as Christians. And they raise concerns, for years, they raised concerns about government policies that have the potential to impact free speech and restrict religious freedom. Not just freedom for Christians, but all religious freedom. Now, they spearheaded the Reform Section 5 campaign. This is about 10 years ago. Because of fears that Section 5 of the Public Order Act would result in Christian teaching being discriminated against, being effectively censored. Now, if you look on YouTube, on the Christian Institute channel, you might find a speech given by Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean, or Blackadder. It's worth listening to, actually. And he was heavily involved in this Reform Section 5 campaign. Now, I hope and pray that our government isn't becoming more repressive, that we're not becoming like the Soviet Union. But even if we were, would it make much difference? Would it make much difference? You see, our deep-seated fear of man already censors us. It censors us much better than any government could. The fear of man already restricts our gospel freedom. The fear of man keeps us from opening our mouths and sharing Christ with those around us, sharing the hope that we have. Now, even the Apostle Paul, that great missionary to the Gentiles, even he knew the suppressive power of fear. In his second letter to the Corinthians, he wrote about his experience in Macedonia. He said, when we arrived in Macedonia, there was no rest for us. We faced conflict from every direction, with battles on the outside and fear on the inside. Fear on the inside. He knew the suppressive power of fear. And when he was a prisoner in Rome, chained up under 24-hour guard, he knew the fear of man could overwhelm him and stop him speaking about Jesus. So he asked the Corinthians to pray for him. And his number one prayer request was that God would give him boldness, that God would give him courage. Courage to keep speaking out about Jesus. He said to them, and pray for me too. Ask God to give me the right words. Even the Apostle Paul was uncertain, so he was sometimes uncertain about what to say. Ask God to give me the right words so I can boldly explain God's mysterious plan that the good news is for Jews and Gentiles alike. I am in chains now. He was under constant watch, constant scrutiny. Imagine that. I am in chains now, still preaching this message as God's ambassador. So pray that I will keep on speaking boldly for him as I should. Pray that I will keep on speaking boldly as I should. Pray that the fear of man will not get the better of me, will not silence me. Now, you've heard the expression, as the cat got your tongue. As the cat got your tongue. When someone's maybe stuttering and they can't get their words out. And apparently it's a reference to the cat o' nine tails. The whip that was used to punish insubordinate sailors. And being struck by the cat o' nine tails was so painful that sailors would be rendered completely speechless. They had the breath taken out of them after being whipped by it. They were rendered speechless. And the fear of man can have the same sort of effect as being hit by the cat o' nine tails. It can knock the speech out of us. We live in a land of deep spiritual darkness. We have had a theme of hope, haven't we, this morning? And it's wonderful that we have a hope. But we live in a land of deep spiritual darkness. Just last month, there was an article in The Independent about a research project called Explaining Atheism. And according to their lead investigator, Britain is entering its first atheist age. Its first atheist age. With the non-religious outnumbering those who believe in God. It's not surprising that we now have our first openly atheist prime minister. I say openly atheist prime minister. Not the first atheist prime minister, but he's the first openly atheist prime minister, who has pledged his support for a change in the law that would introduce abortion for any reason right up until birth. He also wants to fast-track the assisted dying bill. He wants to get it in before Christmas. Without belief in God, absolutely nothing is sacred. Without belief in God, nothing is sacred, including the lives of human beings, whether that be a healthy 40-week-old baby that's about to be born, or those who are under end-of-life care. People are walking through darkness. They're shuffling along from one day to the next with little or no thought of the God who created them, the God who loved them so much that he gave his only son to die on a cross for them. People fill their lives with distractions, with fleeting pleasures that numb the pain and the emptiness of a life lived without God. But there is hope. There is hope. Because a light has shone into the darkness. A light has shone into the darkness. 2,763 years ago, the prophet Isaiah wrote, "The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine." A light will shine. The light Isaiah spoke about, of course, was Jesus. During his earthly ministry, Jesus stood up in the middle of a crowd and shouted to everyone who would listen, "I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness, because you will have the light that leads to life." You will have the light that leads to life. Now, when Ukraine was first invaded back in February 2022, it's been a while, isn't it? February 2022. Russia repeatedly attacked their energy infrastructure. And some nights they were plunged into total darkness. There are NASA photographs from 2022 showing Eastern Europe at night. They're very striking. You can see lights in Russia, in Belarus, in Poland, and Romania, but there's nothing but blackness in Ukraine. Nothing but blackness. No light at all. In those early days of the war, Russia turned Ukraine into a literal land of deep darkness. I remember reading a blog post written by a Ukrainian, it was an anonymous post, a Ukrainian who described life in their village during these power outages. And they mentioned how the complete absence of light pollution allowed the stars of the night sky to break through and shine in all their glory. No light pollution, no electric lights, but the stars of the night sky could break through and shine out in all their glory. You know, that reminded me of the Apostle John's words at the beginning of his gospel account of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, where he describes Jesus as an inextinguishable light that shines in the darkness. An inextinguishable light that shines in the darkness. A light that cannot be put out. Just as the stars gave light to the people of that Ukrainian village, Jesus gives light to everyone who looks to him and believes. And during the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said some very profound things. He challenged his followers when he told them, "You are the light of the world." I've just quoted Jesus as saying, "I am the light of the world," which of course he is. But he said to his followers, you are the light of the world. Like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. As Christians, as those who are trusting in Jesus, who have a hope in him, we are now the light of the world. We are the light of the world inasmuch as our lives reflect Jesus. And Jesus knew that we would be tempted to hide the light he's given us. So he went on to say this. He said, no one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand. No one puts it under a basket. No one hides it away where you can't see the light. You push it on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone around will praise your heavenly Father. The reason we sometimes hide the light of the gospel is because we're afraid of people's response to it. We fear man. When our lives reflect Jesus, they invite scrutiny. When our lives reflect Jesus, they invite scrutiny. People notice. People start watching us carefully. Those who are comfortable living in darkness may try to dim our light. They may try to put it out. We may fall into disfavor and become unpopular. We may find ourselves being discriminated against and treated unfairly. How do we overcome the fear of man so that our lives reflect the light of the gospel? How do we overcome the fear of man? Well, we can take some advice from William Shakespeare. We can take some advice from William Shakespeare. In one of his lesser-known plays, The Life and Death of King John, I don't know if anyone's read that, seen that. The Life and Death of King John, no. You've probably seen Macbeth or Hamlet, but not that one. But anyway, in that play, he wrote, "Be stirring as the time. Be fire with fire. Be fire with fire. Threaten the threatener." This is where the phrase, fight fire with fire, comes from. It's an idiom that uses a metaphor. However, the phrase can also be used literally in the context of firefighting, in the context of fighting forest fires. We've heard a lot about a lot of forest fires in recent months and years, haven't we? Firefighters use controlled fires, deliberate fires, to remove fuel. To remove fuel from an area and stop a forest fire in its tracks. Stop it from spreading. They literally fight fire with fire. They literally fight fire with fire. How do we overcome the fear of man that stops us talking about Jesus and sharing the hope we have with others? We fight fire with fire. Or rather, we fight fear with fear. We fight fear with fear. When it comes to evangelism, we have to fight fear with fear. What do I mean by that? Now, as the people of Judah, back in ancient times, in the ancient Near East, as the people of Judah faced the prospect of being invaded by not one but two enemy armies, the prophet Isaiah, again, called on them to trust God. He encouraged them not to be afraid of enemy threats, not to fear what man can do, but to fear God. They weren't at the mercy of men. They were in God's hands. Isaiah told them, "The Lord has given me a strong warning not to think like everyone else does." He said, "Don't call everything a conspiracy like they do, and don't live in dread of what frightens them. Make the Lord of heaven's armies holy in your life." Make the Lord of heaven's armies holy in your life. He is the one you should fear. He is the one who should make you tremble. How do we overcome the fear of man that hinders our evangelism, that holds us back? We fear God. Now, fearing God in the way Isaiah talked about doesn't involve recoiling away from him. It's not a cowering fear. It's being in awe of his greatness. It's wondering at his power. It's bowing to his majesty. It's marveling at his beauty. He is altogether lovely. It's delighting in his love. It's being filled with joy unspeakable. It's being overcome by his glory. Fearing God in that way liberates us. It frees us up to evangelize without holding back. It compels us to share the gospel, to share the hope that we have. Now, the fear of God that Isaiah talked about is perhaps better understood as reverence. Reverence. It's showing great respect. It's expressing deep admiration. It's giving honor. Now, the Apostle Peter was almost quoting Isaiah when he wrote the verse that Keith read earlier. Let me read it again. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord, or set him apart as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. We overcome the fear of man when we revere Christ as Lord. When we revere Christ as Lord in our hearts. Another translation puts it like this: in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. Honor him as holy. This is the secret to uninhibited evangelism. What is in our hearts is reflected in what we say. It naturally spills out into our conversations. We talk about those things that are dear to our hearts, those things that are most important to us. Jesus put it like this. He said, the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. The mouth speaks what the heart is full of. We are always sharing those things that are sacred and holy to us. Things we hold dear, things that are precious to us. If we've consecrated something in our hearts, it will fill our conversations. We will naturally talk about it. Now, I have a friend who supports Aston Villa Football Club. As a younger man, he was completely fanatical about them. He's a Christian. Hope he forgives me for sharing this. He was fanatical about them. He had a season ticket. He never missed a game, whether it was at home or away. He always wore their latest shirt, unless he was at work. When they won the League Cup in 1996, he asked his hairdresser to shave the letters AV into the back of his head. We joked about how AV stood for the authorized version of the Bible, but he was completely unashamed in his passion for Aston Villa because they were sacred to him. They'd been sacred to him from the time he was a little boy. In his heart, he honored them as holy. He revered them. Now, if people hold a deep-seated conviction in their hearts, they're not afraid to express it, even if it's unpopular. Last Monday, 2 American women were kicked off a British Airways flight that was bound for Austin in Texas. They repeatedly exchanged punches after one of the women demanded that the other remove her red MAGA baseball cap emblazoned with Donald Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again." And the woman wearing the MAGA hat wore it without a hint of self-consciousness or fear because she admired Donald Trump. She revered him. The woman who picked a fight with her was completely brazen and unashamed in her opposition to Donald Trump. Presumably, she was a passionate supporter of Kamala Harris. When we feel passionately enough about something or someone, our feelings flow out. We share our passion without fear. The secret to overcoming the fear of man is to fear God, or rather to revere him. The secret to overcoming our fear of man is to honor Jesus in our hearts, to set him apart as holy. If our hearts are captivated by Jesus, if we're enthralled and delighted by him, our love for him, our passion for him will flow out into our conversations. We may not talk about him in an eloquent way. We may not talk about him in an impressive way. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. What we say about him will be genuine. It will be genuine because it will be from the heart. Amen.